Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for staying. Those in the sanctuary, we're going to begin our presentation. We are really honored today to have Lieutenant David DeMetz from the Claremont Police Department with us. This is part of a training we wanted to do for our greeters and ushers. The plan is to have someone in the narthex every Sunday that's just staying there during the service, keeping an eye on what's going on, making sure there's nothing suspicious. But we wanted to do a training. What does it mean to keep an eye out for something that's suspicious? How do we work against our internal biases? How do we make sure that we're keeping our congregation safe? And so that's what this presentation is about. Michael's in the back recording it, so if you are watching this later, we hope that you can receive this training. As always, there's 1,000 things happening, and so we're working on space issues. We couldn't be in the Louise Roberts room for this, so we moved to the sanctuary, but the choir needs to rehearse for something called Easter coming up. And so Lieutenant DeMetz is going to give a presentation. We're going to wrap this up in about 15 minutes. So we're going to do the presentation, have some opportunity to ask questions, but we're going to wrap this up and get the choir in here in 15 minutes. And you can record it, and we're recording it on the live stream as well. So please just help us welcome Lieutenant DeMetz.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody hear me okay on this? I do karaoke too on Friday, Saturday nights. You want to see me? I brought a band. Thank you very much for having me. My wife's going to love I got to church today, so that's a plus. And no lightning bolts, Jim. I didn't get struck down walking through the doors, so I'm ecstatic about that. My name is David DeMetz. I'm a lieutenant with Claremont PD. I've been there about 20 years. And after Sandy Hook, which occurred in December of 2012, the police department recognized that while the officers were training every year for an active shooter incident, your worst case scenario, we weren't sharing helpful information with school staff. So we started teaching Claremont Unified School District staff, which turned into teaching at the private schools, at businesses, the Claremont colleges, houses of worship. We've actually, specifically houses of worship, we've only done 2 or 3 over the years, which surprises me. But that's why I have some notes in my hand, just so I can stay on track. And I'm going to talk really, really quick. A disclaimer about the presentation. There's no simple solution or a matrix or a flow chart, if you will, if ABC happens and do X, Y, Z when it comes to safety. But there are basic principles and concepts and best practices that I think could be helpful, and we're going to discuss all that. So my only other disclaimer is that some of the subject matter can be difficult to discuss, so please keep that in mind. My number one goal for all of you is to know what your options are during a critical incident, because you've thought about what you would do ahead of time before something happens, okay? Everyone's heard of fight, flight, or freeze. What happens to the human body physiologically under extreme stress caused by fear? You get tunnel vision, right? Potentially your pulse rate increases, you lose your fine motor skills, you may have auditory exclusion. Police officers that have been in officer-involved shootings have described the gunshots as being real soft or muffled, like pops, like pop, pop, pop. All kinds of things happen to you. So we want you, because you've thought about what you would do, be able to fight through that fear and think and react. That's what's most important. So let's see. You can do this also because you've discussed your safety plan with your team, and ideally you've practiced how you would respond. And then you've continually mentally rehearsed on your own as well, which police officers do regularly. People in the military do that regularly, because the ultimate goal is to achieve that best possible outcome. So I'd like to start by briefly summarizing a study, just kind of illustrate some key points that we'll be discussing. The Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, it's a mouthful, they looked at 37 incidents that involved targeted violence against houses of worship between 2009 and 2010. The data for the study was obtained from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and other open sources. Some of the numbers: 54% of the attacks involved an armed assault, like a firearm or an edged weapon, a knife or a vehicle. 36 of the perpetrators were male, right, which is common. 1 was female. 30 acted alone. And 69% of the time, the suspected motivation of the perpetrators was for religious or racial bias reasons. A couple really important numbers to know: 22% of the time, the perpetrator had a prior association with the house of worship. Okay, so that raises a question, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions, which you maybe aren't expecting, but do you know your staff and many in your congregation well enough to know if they're struggling internally with something? Do you reach out to try and help them if there's a growing concern about someone based on what you're aware of, or maybe they're changing behavior, et cetera? What do you do with that information? Is there a mechanism or a process to report that to someone and then ensure that follow-up is done for that person? And then a side note: is there a mechanism to screen or vet some of your greeters and ushers? Or after you get to know them, are they simply greeters and ushers? It's just something to think about. Another important number: 57% of the time, the perpetrator, through actions and or words, engaged in some sort of planning behavior that revealed their intention to attack. 57% of the time, the perpetrator, through actions and or words, engaged in some sort of planning behavior that revealed their intention to attack. That's really important. That creates another opportunity, and they find that with school shootings and workplace violence, everything else. And that's why mental health help, of course, and other strategies can be so important. So what can we do? Start by developing a comprehensive safety plan. And I understand that it's a balance between cost and your culture here at the church and your needs. Should you be prepared for the worst case scenario? Of course. But what's most likely to occur here in the church? Probably a medical emergency. I'll venture to guess there's been one medical emergency here at the church over the years, if not multiple. So are some of your greeters or ushers or staff, are they trained in basic first aid or CPR? Is there an AED available in the church? A different scenario: a homeless person wanders into the sanctuary, and they're agitated and they're distraught and they're probably having a mental health crisis and or under the influence of drugs. Do one of your staff confront that person? Okay, has that person had any type of basic de-escalation training? Something to think about maybe for your greeters and ushers. There's de-escalation training out there. It's free, it's online, it's everywhere. So just something to think about. I know life experience gets us by, but just things that could potentially help. And then a different type of scenario, but maybe a vandalism to the church. The worst vandalism maybe being an arson, where you have major, destruction to the church. How do you respond to that? How does a pastor address the congregation? And then how do you heal and recover as a church and, as a whole, the whole community? So all those scenarios versus an active shooter, they're much more likely to happen. So if you think about that ahead of time and what you would do in those situations, and develop your plan with those things in mind. Back to those competing demands, cost, culture, your needs. Develop the plan with like a solid foundation of security basics, because really it's the basics that are most important. So start by looking at your vulnerabilities. And first and foremost, I would look at your human resources, okay? Who is your team? Who is overseeing the team? Is that the pastor? Would it be better to have someone else overseeing the team? Do you have enough team members? That typically tends to be a problem, right, with everything in life. And then what expertise, if any, do those team members bring with them? I was on a safety committee with a school/church, And on the team was a retired fire department battalion chief, a deputy sheriff, and a registered nurse who worked in an emergency room. And they all brought excellent insight, of course, onto that team and in developing their plans. And then also reach out to other churches to see if they have a safety plan and then to see what works for them or what they're doing. Secondly, look at your actual physical environment. Is there access into this church from other rooms, other classrooms, adjoining buildings, adjacent buildings? In other words, are you able to lock down the church if, and granted maybe most of the services are on a weekend, but if there's an active shooter at the colleges across Harvard here, are you able to lock those doors? Does a greeter or usher have a key, or do you need a key? Are the doors even able to be locked? You're nodding your head no. So the side doors, things like that, okay? Things to think about. Who's heard of run, hide, fight? Those principles or seen the video maybe? Okay, so I'll break that down real quickly. Where would you run or hide in an emergency? If someone comes through that door right now with a knife and wants to start stabbing people, where would you run? Where would you hide, right? So just things to think about. If hiding in a room, of course, stay away from windows, maybe turn off the lights, silence your cell phones. There is text to 911. The technology has come a long way, but you can actually text to 911 or at least call and leave the line open if you can't speak. And I should back up. Obviously, if you can lock the door, do so. If you have to barricade the door with furniture and other objects, do so. And I would recommend you do both if you're able to. Someone that is hell-bent on coming in here and doing harm, they know that they're on borrowed time because the world is coming, not just Claremont Police Department, but everyone is coming. We will be here in a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Their primary goal is to do as much damage as they can in the short period of time that they can prior to probably killing themselves, which happens at least 50% of the time. But anything to slow them down, like they're trying to get into a door and it's locked, or they force the door open but it's barricaded, they're gonna go to the next room, right? So something to think about. Let's see. Does everyone know the difference between cover and concealment? Concealment is something that you can hide behind, the person can't see you. Cover is something that would stop possibly a projectile, like maybe a short block wall behind steel, of course. So if you have both, that's ideal, but think about that with hiding or even running from one spot to another and then having to run to another location. Now, if you can't run, then you may have to fight, right? It's life or death. If you don't defend yourself, you or others could die. So, are there improvised weapons in this church? If you look around, I mean, there are all kinds of things can be improvised weapons, right? Is that horrible to have to think about? It's really unfortunate that we all have to even be talking about this, but you need to think about that because if it's do or die, okay? And better for a few able-bodied, willing people to rush an attacker than fighting solo, obviously, okay? So, and then lastly, just remember situational awareness, principles of run, hide, fight. They can be applied to all other aspects of your life. Does anyone go to a movie now and not look and see where the exits are after Aurora, Colorado, right? So you should be aware of your surroundings when you're walking to your car after this presentation, being careful when you walk to at least being aware when you walk to your front door of your home, okay? You don't have to be as paranoid as cops are, right? But just be aware of your surroundings. It's really important. And then something important about developing the safety plan is reevaluating that plan on a regular basis. You have changes in your staff, or maybe circumstances dictate that you make changes to your plan, so think about that. Okay, and then to wrap it up, the Pastor Jacob sent me a couple questions that I will answer, and then we'll open it up and do some Q&A. How do you identify suspicious behavior? So this can be subjective. The bottom line is it's better to call than to have regrets, right? If you need to call us. Probably a clear example, the Virginia Tech shooter. About a week before the Virginia Tech shooting, the shooter was seen in an outdoor shooting range, and he had placed silhouette targets down on the ground, and he walked between the targets with 2 pistols, 1 in each hand. Boom, 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 boom. Multiple people witnessed this. Many admitted after that it was concerning. Did they tell anybody about that? That's a pretty simple, straightforward, example, but it could be someone that, back to the church, it could be someone taking pictures of the outside of the church, maybe the inside of the church, you don't know who they are, walking up to them and saying hello and asking them, right, what they're doing. You could have someone standing in the corner of the sanctuary, and it's 90 degrees out, and they're wearing a hooded sweatshirt, and they're talking to themselves and they're looking around nervously. Should that be cause for concern? That is suspicious, okay? You don't know yet if they want to do any harm, but you're not sure, so think about a strategy for that. And on that note, briefly, the power of hello, okay? So if I could use you, maybe you want to stand up. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
How are you?
My name's David. I'm one of the greeters. I don't think I've seen you here before. Are you new to the church?
Yeah,
or?
new to Claremont. Yeah.
New to Claremont. Okay, well, welcome. If there's anything I can do for you, if you have any questions, let me know, and we'll be happy to help. But welcome. I'm glad you're here. Thanks. Okay. So, as a greeter, even as an usher, right, in the first few seconds, I knew that he's not a threat, right? And this is someone maybe, I'm sure they do that as a routine, on a routine basis anyway, but say I see someone and I'm not quite sure, I'm just wondering about them. The power of hello, finding out who they are, or maybe they are somewhat concerning, and so you decide, I'm gonna keep an eye on that person. Or it rises to the level of, I think I need to call the police. So, do you call the police? Or do you have a fellow greeter call the police? I don't know if there's 2 greeters or staff that are working together at one time necessarily, but you want to be, quiet. You don't want to be disruptive. You want to be discreet. Probably best for that person to call the police, but maybe have another greeter keep an eye on the person. But then how do you communicate with that other greeter? So these are all things to think about. When you call, be prepared to explain why the person looks suspicious to you. What is it about their behavior that looks suspicious? If you haven't already explained clearly enough for the call taker or dispatcher to know, okay? And then be prepared to describe them. He's wearing a gray sweater, black slacks, age, etc. So, okay? But discuss all this amongst your team. Thanks for volunteering, appreciate it. Being voluntold, that's what we say at my work.
What does call the police mean exactly?
So if it's a non-emergency, you can call the non-emergency number. If you're not sure if it's an emergency, call 911.
And if I call 911 on my cell phone from here,
It will not go to CHP. It will not go to CHP.
does it go to Claremont?
It'll go directly to Claremont Police Department. Any fire or police calls, all the 911 in the city of Claremont, I should make an exception to that, but most of the calls go directly to our dispatch center. We actually transfer the people to fire, to Los Angeles County Fire, the contracts for this area. If you're near a freeway, and I can give you this number if anyone's interested, but there is a direct landline number, which is the equivalent to 911, but you can pre-program it on your cell phone, and it goes directly into our dispatch, just like 911. And that's for if you're near the freeway. For those of you that don't know, your call will most likely get routed to CHP. I'm not a techie person, but within so many, meters of a freeway, the call will probably go to CHP, and then you have to get transferred to us, which can create a delay, right? Which a delay may not be good. So, but I can give you that number either before or after, if you'd like that number. No, that's maybe a non-emergency number. It's 909-626-1296. Okay, and that's an emergency number, so that is just for emergencies. It's essentially the same as 911. It's a recorded line, straight to our dispatch. Pastor Jacob had one other question. How do we keep our inherent biases in check when determining what is suspicious behavior? That's a tough question. It's a tough question. We all have our life experiences and beliefs that make us who we are, right? I think acknowledging that you have biases and keeping them in mind and self-monitoring when you're evaluating a situation can help. As an example, a simple example, most people don't want to consciously make a judgment about someone based on appearance. But if you look at that person's behavior and it's concerning to you, don't overthink that. That's really important. Be as objective as you can, making your observations, but if there's any question whether or not somebody poses a threat to you or others at the church, then, don't disregard your sound, reasonable judgment and instinct that you possess. Make that call. I haven't mentioned this, I probably should have mentioned it before and multiple times, but the police department would always rather you call for us to check someone out and it be nothing than us not come and there'd be a problem. And I've seen that occur many, many, many times because people, they, don't want to necessarily make a mistake with, an observation and then be looked upon negatively for that decision. So, be sure to do that. Lastly, after an incident at the church, and it could even be something minor, but bring that back to your safety team or committee and talk about it, debrief it, okay? Get their input and feedback so everyone can learn from that, what went right, what could maybe be improved upon, because that's how we grow, right, and learn. That is essentially what I have. Like I said, no magic formula or answers, but things to think about. Does anybody have questions?
Not a question, just an observation from a couple of things that I've been through. I used to work at a hospital. I worked in a school as a special education teacher, so these things were on my mind. Episodes came up. At the high school where I worked, we had a kid bring a knife, and two of the male special ed teachers tricked them into going into an empty classroom and disarmed them. It was never reported. I wouldn't think things are any better today, to be honest, in the schools. I also, as a therapist, worked with a patient in their home. The patient was told to move from their house to an apartment because they had a stroke and they couldn't safely go up and down stairs. Somebody decided not to pay their rent in that building, and when the landlord came to argue with them about it, they shot up the place. I mean, it could be anybody. I don't look like somebody that's had that kind of a life. There were bomb threats at the hospital and so on. After I retired, we were walking our dog near the local elementary school, and I saw a nice-looking young man, sparkling new clothing. This was just after Christmas, so probably Christmas presents. White pants, a dark hoodie shirt, and a duffel bag, talking to himself. And I looked carefully. No, he wasn't on a cell phone. He didn't have earbuds. And talking to himself angrily. And then he stopped by the kindergarten where the kids were outside playing. So I reported it.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked a half a block farther and reported it. And then he followed us because he saw me doing that. Police came and talked to him, calmed him down. It didn't turn into an incident, but it was suspicious.
Yeah. Everything really comes down to a judgment call, but we would rather the behavior. We'd rather you.
Listening to music
Yeah.
or something.
We just want you to be safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other guy was angry,
Right.
talking to himself, tense muscles.
Right. We want you to be safe versus sorry.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, we had been
so.
on lockdown at the hospital because somebody didn't like the treatment of their family member and got into it with an administrator, and there was a bomb threat. I mean, we were 3 miles away from the terrorist attack in San Bernardino when that happened. So we had some training.
Good.
So I
Good.
was here to see if there
Yeah.
was anything new in that regard.
Ma'am.
I know there'll be a follow-up, and would you ask Jacob maybe if one of the follow-ups could be a link for us to deposit these stories so that we know that there's this homeless guy that slides into the back view.
Yeah.
And we know I saw, marks out where he sees a thing or two, and if we can each share what we know is okay, what we know that we've thought, well, that's weird.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we can
Yeah,
have
something
a
internal that,
for that.
correct. Yeah. That's not a bad idea at all. Sir.
It's also important, I think, for us to develop a sense of community so that we can check with each other. You know, if Kay sees something, she knows, she can ask me, does that look like a stranger? Did you see, on some mornings, right on the corner, I see something, I automatically think I could call Jacob or Jen from being minister. I know they're running around with their heads like a chicken, but, you know, we develop enough of a community among ourselves that we know, who's there on Sunday that we can kind of.
Yeah, bouncing things off of each other is crucial, really, because it's that can be helpful.
I mean, I would just say, I'm not a Mr. Security guy, but I'm happy to help, or if you ever have a question, ask,
I think a more likely scenario that I've seen happen in the churches I've been coming a couple of years is someone doesn't agree with the service for whatever reason, starts yelling. There was a service where a gentleman was sitting right here, just started yelling, shame on you, shame on you. So I don't know, what is the protocol for
I
that?
don't know, I was very impressed when Jacob chased him down.
Yeah.
But if we're prepared, I don't know.
I was sitting on the outside and he just stopped and started berating the parishioners and saying, shame on you, shame on you. And I was the only one that spoke up and said, hey, we hear you. You don't want to be here, please exit. But if I was on the inside, I would have got him and said, hey, I hear what you're saying, I know where you're coming from, but if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. So I think that's a more likely scenario.
And that's a perfect way to word it too, in a low, calm voice, and trying to kind of diffuse the situation as best you can. And if you can't, and people are concerned about safety, then call us, because you don't have to put yourself in a situation that might,
He was just indignant about us.
yeah, right. So you have to be the judge of.
We appreciate your speech, but please. We're a little bit older than you and
I think what, as you can see, like, we have no organization at all. So I think it might be helpful if you could send Jacob an email just with like 3 points about what we should do to get organized, because
Sure.
Should we have a point person?
Yeah,
every
exactly.
Sunday?
Because like for me, like I don't even have my phone on me.
Right.
Reinstate name badges, there should be good examples of getting.
And we are already talking about there being sort of a head person, because there's somebody who's the point person on Sunday morning. We would appreciate suggestions, and we will also begin to create some kind of a partly hierarchy of each other and some particular points like you've already mentioned.
Is there one more question I could take? We don't for the community. We're required to do it, just like unbiased policing every year. We have all this training, but we don't provide that for the community. If you go online, there's so much of that out there. There's in-person classes online, et cetera. Yeah. That is huge and very, very important for your greeters and ushers to be able to de-escalate. So, one last question, then I know we need to wrap it up. Sure, sure, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what you said there. Right away you knew this person isn't harmed. That hello
Right.
just does so much.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Pastor Jacob has my contact info. I'm grateful for all of you. Just want you to be safe. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for coming. You said there was an online